thought of myself as a film director. I have to say that at any point in my life. Canvas was much more private, of course, and it was great to paint, but every now and again it was more fun to have a lot of people around, and so the element of what one might call throwing a party in my filmmaking was very important. And everyone used to come along, and I would try and give them a good day, you know? It was happy work. That was my aim. It's probably all I actually ever wanted out of the whole thing. Quite simple. You know, and then one would make the films one wanted to make, which was very lucky. I'm one of the very few filmmakers who've been blessed to be able to do this. I never actually made a film which was foisted on me or anything. That's rare. I don't know. I found the filmmaking part very good fun, although every now and again very, very aggravating. There is something very aggravating about filmmaking. You know, you somehow want it to go faster than it does, or whatever. So you have to adopt a very... you'd be a good Buddhist, actually, after making films. Should be.
Things about you as a filmmaker is that you've made films using all sorts of different techniques. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, there is. I think partly in order to work, simply because very often the techniques I use are very cheap, and also it was an exciting era during the 1980s because we started the 1980s with very primitive video, really, and we ended up with very sophisticated video, and on the way I discovered you could put the Super 8 onto video and then back to film. I mean, when I started, it was something we did in Beaconsfield in John Hall's garden shed. By the end of the decade, we were making feature films using the same techniques. And it was quite exciting. There's a lot of free form in the Super 8. You know, you wouldn't have to film in the formal way that you normally would, so that was fun. Terence Davies said they were a mess, those films, I remember. He's probably right. But they were fun to do. I have to say that it was always partly in the back of my mind, let's make a film that everyone enjoys making. And the Super 8 certainly was that, because everyone could join in. I'd bung the cameras in to people and say, you film. And they'd all come along and do it. And we'd stuck as a fairly tight gang. I mean, you know, we'd always have the same people there. Which is the best way in some ways, because everyone knows each other. Then when they come on, you know, on the first day, you don't have all that business of everyone trying to get to know each other. I think it really helps to have a gang, your gang. And we had a very good gang, I mean, you know, and everyone would do something. Including the actors. I mean, the actors with the cameraman with the actors, it got all muddled.
But you're in danger, I think, in a way, of being categorized. People always like to categorize filmmakers, and you might be put in the position of being regarded as the avant-garde or an alternative filmmaker.
I never felt it myself. I just thought I was making films, and probably I was making films in a way which sometimes not the most conventional way of doing them, John. So, I mean, I don't think of myself as avant-garde. I mean, I think avant-garde died with Marcel Duchamp before the war. So, I mean, you know, I find that all very odd, that category. I've never made those categories. I mean, you know, people make films and that's it, you know. I never felt for myself like this. It's odd. I just thought, oh, I'm making films.
What follows is usually that your films get shown with collections associated with alternative filmmaking, perhaps with the ICA, or you're in a position of being an art house cinema maker, and therefore perhaps the screenings are limited.
I don't think they're any more limited than any other film, actually. I mean, the thing about it is that the films, and they're now some of them 15 years old, are continuously shown. Whereas if you were to go back and say, oh, what commercial film was made that year, I can assure you they're never shown. Who cares? So, I mean, you know, in a sense, that they're what one might call slow burners. In the end, more people will see Sebastian than have seen Raging Bull or something. You know, the fact of the matter is actually the truth of the matter. And people forget that. You know, you either go for the quick Hollywood turnover, or you can do a slow one, slow burner, and then people come and look at it year after year. I hope I hope that's what will happen with my films. I think the British Council in my filmmaking career have been absolutely instrumental in getting the films around, which is wonderful. So let's hope we have a very strange show somewhere like Ulaanbaatar.
I'd like to ask you to say something now, Dirk, about your various feature films. I'd like to start with Sebastian and Jubilee.
Well, Sebastian created more havoc at the beginning and doesn't seem to any longer, but I remember when we showed it at Locarno, everyone got very uptight, and the whole audience was sort of banging their feet and walking out very noisily. In fact, I was a bit shocked because I didn't realise I'd made anything that would upset people like that. You can imagine. And then we had a real grueling question and answer session in the town square with all these filmmakers saying that it was so badly made that it shouldn't have been shown. However, I mean, it was shown, and that's all history. Jubilee was another matter. I mean, Jubilee got tied up much later on with problems when it was shown on television. I mean, when it was just a film, no one really... Although I must say some people were a bit upset about it. I remember Vivienne Westwood getting very upset, and the designer,
yes,
and various other girl who said, sung All We Need Is Love in front of the screen in a big hippie dress. She was rather good, actually, on the first night. I quite liked all of that, right? My mum, I remember, who was very ill at the time, and was in a wheelchair, thought it was all right, although the man in front of us fainted, which I couldn't understand why anyone should faint. I didn't know what was in Jubilee that would make anyone faint. It's bizarre, because when you've made a thing yourself, you sometimes don't understand the reactions. But it was quite a riotous screening, the first screening of Jubilee, and quite fun because of that. Same with Sebastian in its own way, although sometimes when it's all going on, you feel, oh lordy, you know, why don't they all just shut up? You know, they can always walk out, can't they? But my mother thought Jubilee was a very accurate film. I remember her saying this as we left. This middle-class, middle-aged lady in a shawl, in a wheelchair. It was quite good. My parents were quite supportive, actually. So was Dad when we showed Sebastian. Because Barney said, oh, I bet Force's life was never really like that. And Dad said, actually, it's rather accurate, which I was very surprised at. So...
Your version of Shakespeare's The Tempest, one of the things I remember was that it didn't seem to have done very well in America. It's for some reason, they seem to take against such an adaptation.
Well, I think it was Vincent Canby, wasn't it? Who was the critic in the New York Times. He never really liked me very much. He spent his time after being even ruder. He said like sand and spinach, didn't he? And like the ugly shriek of chalk across the blackboard. I mean, that was the description of The Tempest. I must say it gave us all a bit of a surprise because it has been so successful here. And we arrived in New York and got these vicious reviews. And it closed the film within 4 or 5 days. I mean, it was uptown. It couldn't withstand that sort of criticism. You know, it needed the New York Times. Which was a pity because I think the film it was very modest, really, and it was a way of solving an equation. I mean, you've got an island, and what do you do about it? So, I found Stoneleigh Abbey with Christopher, and sort of turned it into an island. It was a rather wonderful island because Elizabeth of Bohemia, whose wedding this Tempest was performed at, her wedding ceremonies, was actually in the front hall. I mean, a beautiful portrait of her, of Stoneleigh. And so the day we got there, we sort of thought, well, this is serendipity. Look, there she is in the front hall. So maybe she'll look at us benevolently. And we had a very wonderful time filming there, and it was in the middle of the winter. It was quite magical. I mean, the place was covered with snow. It was that very, very cold winter. But the one I did in the end was fairly conventional, in spite of the Americans disliking it. I think the American observation of Shakespearean films is that someone like Kenneth Branagh's Henry V is very wild. The Tempest was too wild. So we didn't get very good reviews. It's a pity, because I thought that we might have a breakthrough there at that moment. And the thing about America is that if you can make a few bob there, it does help. I mean, you have to move there, but it does help fund films here if they're a bit of a success. I never had that success in America, so it's very complicated.
You achieved considerable success with Caravaggio, and your work began to reach much wider audiences. But it took about 7 years, I think, to realise this project.
I started in 1978, I think, and we were filming in 1985, so it was quite a long journey. The thing about it was that I realised that unless I stuck with it, I would never make the films I wanted to make. It went through all sorts of extraordinary transformations. I worked on the script with Suso Cecchi-D'Amico, who had done all the Visconti films. I was nearly usurped by some Italian petrol millionaire who wanted to turn it into the straightest film that could be possibly made, with lots of sort of Italian starlets in it. And in the end, I was rescued by the British Film Institute, who put the money into it and put their shoulders behind it. And the film was made very quickly, I think 4 or 5 weeks probably, in the Isle of Dogs in a warehouse which wasn't even soundproofed. I remember people's feet clattering through high-heel shoes. Clip, 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 clip. In the end, I gave up. I said, we'll just have a modern soundtrack in the whole thing, so then it doesn't matter. But Caravaggio is wonderful for the illusion, that you think you are in Italy and you're not. And I think I take my hat off to myself for that, because it was really sharply done. I mean, visually, really. And of all films of the painters, it's one of the very best. It's one of the only ones that gets anything near to what being a painter is. There are one or two quite good ones, but Caravaggio is as good as any. And certainly I was lucky with Nigel Terry, the actor. He looked the spitting image of Caravaggio. I'd be very lucky with my look-alike actors, both him and Carl Johnson in Wittgenstein. Carl looks exactly like Wittgenstein. It's sort of uncanny.
With The Last of England, you present a very bleak look at modern Britain.
Yeah, it was a fairly bleak time for those of us who disagreed with what was happening around in the 1980s. Somehow it looks as if the 1980s were going to go on for at least 3 decades, and there would always be Mrs. Thatcher there, and there'd always be, it somehow become like this. You've got this horrible feeling of stagnation. And I think that The Last of England came out of that feeling. It was a very aggravating time. He wanted things to change. Yet, they're not going to. That sort of feeling. What can I say about it? I mean, it doesn't actually tally with the reality of this place. It was much more mental journey. And bits of it are rather good, but it gets up and down. It's up and down. You can't possibly make a film which is consistent with a Super 8 camera. It's too complicated.
I wonder whether The Last of England is perhaps less acceptable as a framework in which to mourn the tragedy of modern society than perhaps The War Requiem, because it's distance in time and it doesn't cover contemporary issues.
Well, yes, I think The War Requiem is... I always forget that I made it. That's strange, you know, because it was quite conventionally made. And the remarkable thing is he made it in 2 coal cellars, the entire thing, in a disused asylum at Durham. And we built up bricks and things in them and turned them into, landscapes. And I think and then we opened it up, of course, with the found footage from the Imperial War Museum. So it's very difficult for me to know what to say about that film because it never goes through my mind that I ever even made it. It came out of a situation where I spoke to Tom Boyd and I said, it's quite mad that we're making all these pop promos. I wonder if anyone's thought of doing anything bigger, longer, in that same sort of way. He said, what will you do? I said, well, there's only one thing, because it's dead easy, and that's the War Requiem, because it's easy simply because you don't have to explain who anyone is. There'll be nurses or soldiers or whatever. Whereas if you were to take a piece of music like Belshazzar Suisse, you'd be up against the wall trying to describe who all these different people were. So it was an easy thing to do. But it worked in its own quiet way. Certain parts of the film worked better. The snowball scene worked very well. And they were throwing snowballs. That worked. It was actually quite moving, that bit. Other bits were up and down. It was almost too impossible to do it, of course, in 2 coal cellars with the resources. But we had a bash. I'm glad we made the film, although, as I said, it's never been one that I've actually really remembered.
Can I turn to one that I know that you will remember? The Angelic Conversation, which I've been told is one of your favourite films.
I think it probably is the favourite of all my films. It has there's a certain shadowy quality because it was made in Super 8 and very early days for transferring to 35mm. And it strikes me that the people in the film are filmed in a way that I've never seen people in another film. So it has this extraordinary, almost, I don't know, can't quite explain, but archaic, I think would be the right word, quality. Which at the best moments in the film are very good. I think the film is ace when it comes to portraying poetry. I had Judi Dench do the sonnets. She did them in the morning, quite quickly. And I don't think it could have been a better choice. She's got a most beautiful voice. And the rest of it was all filmed down in Dorset, along the summer coast. It was a hot summer, and we just went down there, and quite honestly, it's just people walking around. They're not doing anything. And that's also one that charms about the film. There is absolutely very little residual narrative or anything in it, so they just are being the people in it, They're not being in a drama or anything. And the last part was done at Montacute in Somerset, at the old house there, which I remember as a child because I lived in Somerset. And I don't know, it seemed kind of magical when the footage came through. And oddly enough, whenever I show the film, there's always someone in the audience who says it's the most beautiful film we've seen.
Many people know that you live in a converted fisherman's hut on the south coast, Dungeness, close by the nuclear power station. And it's there that you actually filmed The Garden.
Well, The Garden started off as a sort of home movie, really, because I was actually filming The Garden, and it slowly developed. And then James, my producer, said, oh, well, let's try and make a feature film out of all of this. And it was a whole series of desperately incoherent pieces of Super 8, and then we got a gang of people down for a couple of weeks and attempted to make some sort of order by building it roughly around the gospel story. What was strange about this is that the film won the Catholic Award for the best religious film of that year, which is quite surprising, but I mean, it did. And what else can I say about it? Again, it was an improvisation, rather like The Last of England. I think if you're going to do those sort of improvised films, you've got to take a subject matter which everyone would agree on. So taking the gospel story, everyone knows the story, so you don't have to start explaining if things come up in odd order or whatever. I had the advantage of Tilda as well, who by this time had really established her reputation. And she was very, very good in the film. So it sort of worked. I don't know whether it does or not. I haven't really seen it since. I tend to see my films a lot when they come out, 20, 30 times with audiences, and then after that I never bother. So I've no idea what it really is like, this film, any longer. You forget quite quickly, thank heavens. You know, one does not remember what one's done. It's quite a surprise sometimes. You go and see something like The War Wreck and you think, oh my God, did we do this or that?
You adapted Edward II. How did you go about converting this play for the cinema?
Very complicated. I don't know if I can answer that really, you know, because you just dive in and you're cutting it up and rearranging it and doing all the sorts of things you have to do to make it into a film. So I'm not actually, there was no plan in a sense. I think everything was very organic in that sense. I never had plans. I worked in a very organic, just from the top of my head, really. I don't know how I did it, because I didn't ever particularly like the play. And then Edmund White, the novelist, said I should make a film of it, and I thought, well, it's a bad idea. So that was the first I ever heard about the thing. And then again, I mean, I suddenly found myself doing it. You know, it was a fabulous thing to be told to do. No, I mean, it didn't, I was quite surprised that it was liked as much as it was. I had no idea where we were going. I mean, this is the truth of the matter. It's really difficult. Oddly enough, the nearer in time these films are, the more complicated it is to remember what one was actually up to. Wittgenstein, well, yes, I mean, that's easy, because it was all there in his writing, and it was full of humour. So I was able to make a film with a bit of humour in it, thank God. After years of gloomy films, that's what I said to myself, was the film made, you know, our first screening, I said, at least I made a comedy, or some comedy, and everyone knows that I'm not as po-faced as they probably think.
In a way, the completion of the film Blue seems to have brought you full circle. It's returned you to the fine art world.
It has, definite. You know, it has roots in painting like Yves Klein and wherever, and it is very much a painter's film. On the other hand, it is a film, which is quite interesting, because technically speaking, it shouldn't be. It should be some experiment, you know? And it isn't an experiment. It's not an experimental film of any sort whatsoever. And for some reason or other, it was the best solution for the subject, that there should be no images on it. I can't imagine it with images on.
Did you find it painful to relive some of the experiences you went through, which you portray in the diary?
No, not really. In a way, it was sort of cathartic. It got it out of your system. You know. I'm very lucky. I mean, you know, most of the people who are very ill just sit there being very ill. I was very lucky I could actually turn it into something. So, you know, I don't think it It doesn't upset me. I mean, I'm so used to living with illness now that I can't imagine anything else. You know, it's completely subsumed like real life. You know, staggering around. So, you know, I don't think that. No, I mean, I'm just glad that I could put it on record. I felt someone should put some of it on record, and this was one way of doing it. I hadn't seen anyone put any of this on record, not very well at least. And by removing people from it, you know, making it much more abstract, one left it free floating for people to make up their own minds. It's sometimes difficult to identify with X person, you know. And also the other great problem is making films about illness is a very, very dodgy area. They don't work very often. I mean, who wants to go and see that to start off with? However, in this particular case, it seems to work. What the ingredient is, I don't know.
I wonder whether you want to continue making films.
No, I don't want to carry on making films. The Blue film was my last film. I'd be very happy if, for some reasons, someone produced some money for a film like Narrow Rooms, I'd do it. But I have to say my energy is very limited now, and I suspect it would be very, very hard to make a film, but not impossible. And what I'm going to do instead is paint. I'm much happier painting now. Carl and I can sit in this room, which is an extremely nice room, and quietly work. I see no problem. I mean, the paintings are just as interesting as the films. So it's not as if one was taking second best or anything. There we are, John.